we're going to talk about foundations. And there are probably 60 ways to do foundations. I'm not going to tell you all how to do foundations. I want to talk about 6 types of foundations that you should know about, or at least variations of them. So the first one is you dig a hole. You put in a concrete pad. You can pour that, or you can buy them, 14-inch concrete discs. So drop that down the hole. Your post sits on that. That essentially makes it where your post has something to hold. It's not going to sink down any further than that. It's a solid base for it to sit on. That is optional, but not at all a bad idea. The other thing I'm going to talk about is these uplift plates. So if you're going to pour concrete in a hole, and your post is going to go in that, these uplift plates are hammered into the sides of the posts. They are an economical yet very effective method of increasing wind uplift when your posts are going into concrete. 1 or 2 per post, just extremely reasonably priced and extremely easy to install, but worth every penny. You're going to either dry set or wet set concrete. I'm not a concrete guy. I won't tell you how to do it. Some people say don't dry set them. Some people say definitely dry set them. The benefit of pouring your dry concrete in and pouring in water later is you can do that ahead. You can go ahead and get your dirt in, and then you can set you have more time to get your posts right where you want them, a little bit right, left, as far as just making sure they are perfectly level. But there again, I'm not a concrete expert, so that's something I recommend you find out what your project requires. That may be different depending on whether you're doing a home barn dough, maybe different depending on whether you're doing a small garage that is not as critical. Both ways can be effective. And also the depth. So this is showing about a 3 foot. Depending on how much concrete you're putting, you can also do a 2 foot and do a bigger, wider pad. So this is about 18 inch. Sometimes people do a little bit nearer than that, maybe 16 inches. Some people do 24. It's all about what you're trying to hold down, and also how much weight is going to be applied to that. So that's just a common way to do that. Permacolumn. So this is a different method of anchoring entirely. So you're still using a pad. Permacolumn has a 40-inch high precast concrete, high density concrete, and it has the anchor similar to this, already precast into it. The biggest benefit of that compared to setting your wood in the ground is here's all the dirt. There's all types of bacteria and algae trying to eat away your wood if it's in the dirt. If your post goes up here, it's away from all that. To alleviate that, there's a lot of things you can do. There's some people wrap their posts with something similar to ice and water shield. Some people take and dip it in tar. There are plastic covers you can slip over the end of it, but it's still in the dirt. And so this is just a way of saying let's keep away our wood from the dirt. And just highly effective. It's going to be more expensive. Depends on what type of project you're going to do. The other thing it allows is you can visually inspect your post. If your post is here, properly treated, it can last 40, 50 years. Here, whatever it's doing, you're going to see it. It's right in front of you. This has a 1/2-inch bolt, 2 of those. Typically what people do, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but there are 4 smaller holes. You can use just like a regular wood screw for metal roofing. So it holds it in place, until you get your levels all perfect. And then once you get all that right, then you're going to drill for your 1/2 inch hole and go and set those bolts. And the last one's called footing pad. So essentially the main idea of this is you're taking the weight of the building and making sure the whole weight is supported by the dirt. You don't want it to settle and push down further. This is not going to give you added uplift, but depending on the project, that may not be as important. The weight of your building holds the building down as well. So you're not just, the weight of the concrete does a few things, but the weight of dirt is actually very effective in some situations. So basically is a might as well call it a plastic pad, and you drop it in the hole just like you would the concrete pad, and it makes it where your post it has the pressure of that post is evenly distributed in that hole. So that's a few in-ground options. So on or in slab options. First one we're going to talk about is drill set. So before you get to that point, I don't claim to be a concrete pour expert, but whether you're pouring it yourself or working with someone that pours pads, you need to know what you plan to do, what you need to do based on the building. That can be different depending on whether it's a shop, a garage, or a home, barn dominium, where you're really trying to make sure you're dealing with any sweating that you're dealing with the concrete. So you're going to have crusher gravel, generally a few inches of that, and that helps level your ground and also just make sure it's nice and solid. Depending on the situation, you may also install plastic. You may also install an insulation, whether that be an APS rigid, a radiant. It's kind of like double bubble. Double bubble actually works well for that. Or closed cell spray, which is less common under floors. But one of the things that's important to think about those layers is they add thickness. So when you're thinking about what are you going to be adding now, or what are you going to be adding later, just keep that in mind. Everything raises up the level what you're working with. But the drill set anchors, so you're going to drill your holes, has a 5-inch. I wish I had one here to show you, but we got them at the shop. So, but the drill those in. So the benefit of a drill set is you can pour your pad, get it all ready. If the concrete's dry, the concrete's cured, measure for it, and then just like you would anchor a piece of equipment down in your shop, it's the same idea. You're fastening it down with 5-inch that are going to do a very good job of holding that down. So next option is wet set anchor, and there are two very different purposes or uses for this, and it depends on what you're doing. So if you're going to put a pad later, or if you're going to put a pad at that point, you may not need this to go down as far because you're going to have all of the concrete. It's all going to mold together and provide uplift and provide stability. So you may only need to go down right past the 18-inch rebar. So these are heavy duty. So basically that benefit of that is you got 18 inches in the concrete. They're just extremely strong. You really won't beat them for strength. If you're doing piers, so if you're drilling, you're not doing concrete full slab. You're just going to put piers wherever those are at. Generally, people will go down a little bit further, depending on the size of the building. If it's a smaller building, you may not need to go much further down than just the typical 20 inches. But if you're holding a heavier building, you'll want to go down a little farther. This is a sonotube. So basically just, they sell them Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, but basically it's just a cardboard tube that works as a cast. You slit it, you put it in that hole, it expands out, and it gives you a nice level, round surface to pour your concrete and to get everything level. disadvantage of a wet set is everything has to be timed just right. So everything's got to be measured out. You need to know where those holes are at before you pour. You may want to only pour half of yours, set those, or the other half, set those. You don't want it to dry up before you get those in, trust me. So then you're going to be saying, let's skip that and move to that. So let's try not to do that. The last one is a universal half bracket. So the benefit of a universal half bracket is when you get to outside corners, this is going to have a bolt that's going to be on the outside of your building and can interfere with your wall girts if it's going to be enclosed. Or the drill set, it has a bracket that will definitely extend past the edge of that corner in some direction. So your wall girt will cover a little bit of that, but this bottom leg is going to stick out past your building at some point. That's not generally desirable. The other thing that's good for is for doors, where you don't want that brackets sticking in your entrance of your door and you're going to drive over the bolts. So most people just put one of those to hold up each door post support. Also for those, if used at a door, or even if used in outside corner, some people use a carriage bolt just to make sure that it's flush. So you can use that to pull that bolt in so it doesn't extend out and interfere with or require that you adjust some of your wall supports. And because we use all drill sets here, you'll see that we had to use some additional wood blocking to help support in certain areas. And that's the benefit of these half brackets, is all of your wall girts can just be fastened, especially if you use carriage bolts. They're not going to interfere with any of your wall girts being installed. Site prep. So this is going to really depend on what you're doing. But first thing is you want to think about the water flow. Last thing you want with any construction project is to have water that's going to go towards the middle of your building and pool. So whether it's going to be open frame or enclosed, just keep that in mind. If you're pre-pouring your concrete pad, that's another thing some people do is they'll install their posts and they'll get everything done with or without gravel, and then they'll come and pour the pad later. But if you're pouring a pad ahead of your posts, just keep in mind the size, making sure that all of your brackets are going to fully fit on it, especially with if you were to install this one, for example, and fail to get any of those half brackets, that might stick out past your pad, and you don't want that to happen. So another benefit of those half brackets. Squaring and marking, and we'll talk about a rotary laser in a little bit, but that can help really get a laser line to make sure that those first two most important measurements are perfectly at a right angle. Highly recommended. If you don't have that tool or have access to a rotary laser, then you'll definitely want to focus on that A squared, B squared, make sure that it's squared using C squared. So you can find that C squared measurement on our drawings.
Do y'all offer a blueprint with each one of the other sides?
Yes, and I'll show that in just a minute too. So we offer a post layout. Megan, will you stand up for me? And Sarah, will you stand up? So Megan and Sarah and Kelsey are post-frame building experts. If you go to AmericanPoleBarns.com, you put in what you're looking for. If it's straight run with lean-tos, you can just use words. If you're trying to match something, you can upload drawings. And what we'll send you will be all the drawings, a full material list that will show the spacing on posts and all of this. Thank you. So I'll show an example of that here in a moment. So there again, what you're looking for is the measurements. Setting those two, and then using that to get those two. And then from there, anything else you're just going to measure out and make sure you're staying square. A squared and B squared and C squared work the same, whether it's a rectangle here or a rectangle here. So everything needs to be square. The good thing about wood and the good thing about steel is they're a little bit flexible. So you have more give than some materials. That does not excuse designing things and laying things out properly. So don't use that as an excuse and say, "Oh, we'll deal with it when we start slapping on the sheathing." Go ahead and get it square now. Okay, so this is a post layout. It's not the same building as this one, but so what you're looking at is the drawings. Now, if you don't use the drawings, it may not work out so well. So if you get a quote, before you place that order, preferably before you send it to your customer, take a look and make sure it is what you've asked for, because we send those drawings so you can verify those. And this is included with every one of our shop drawings. So you're talking about a 40 by 60 building with a lean-to that is 12 by whatever it takes to make that corner. So one of the important things is the difference between the typical 10-foot on center, which is center post to center post, and the outside post. To make your building be 60 foot long, that last post is center to outside. That's important because if you set that center to center, your building will be 60 foot, 2 3/4 of an inch. And that may be fine, but just know it won't be quite what the drawings show. And so for that purpose, if you want the drawings to lay out nicely and you want to be able to verify your angle measurements, use the measurements here, or before you order it, get it adjusted to what you want it to be. So just keep that in mind that we're building all the material, not just the posts, but also the wall panels, the roof panels based off of these drawings and these measurements on the posts. So edge to center may be a little different on your corners versus the rest will all be 10 foot on center. And this drawing doesn't have doorposts, but those will be whatever they need to be to support whatever door's there if you tell us about it. So if you plan to put in a door, but you just tell us it's a 40 by 60 and don't tell us you have a door, we're not going to figure extra posts for that. So if you want a door, even if you want to buy it somewhere else, tell us about it. Doors we provide walk doors, and we provide roll-up doors in sizes from 8 foot wide to probably 20-some foot wide. If you have windows, we don't sell windows, but we can still make sure we provide the materials and we can show the cutouts to plan for those. So everything's level. Depending on whether it's concrete and you're using wet sets or drill sets or half brackets, or if it's in ground, in which case you may be pouring a pad ahead of time and using a half bracket, a wet set, a drill set, or in ground. Either way, they all need braced. So if you're using a wet set or drill set that's cured, the bracing won't be, you may not need as much bracing as if it's in the ground, but either way, you still want to brace it to make sure you're getting your post level. So to do that, typically you're going to start with your first post and you're going to brace it from the side and brace it from the end. Working with it till it's level both ways. Use a little short spike piece of wood just to support that in the ground as an anchor. Typically we'll use the same 3-inch deck screws that we're using for our girts to tack those. After that, the remaining posts in that line are going to be fastened from the side to the ground and from the previous post to that post. Here we've shown leaving out a gable end. So it depends on what opening sizes you have, size of the building. That just allows you to get equipment in easier. You can always do this, the supports here later. You may have plenty of room and you can go ahead and put those posts in depending on the equipment and the size of the truss, but it just makes it easier to get those trusses up later and get everything in place. A couple of tools, getting your post level. There are some really complicated tools to get that post level, or you can buy a 7-foot post level. It straps you on your post and levels it all 3 directions. So that's what I would recommend. You can buy one for the bottom and the top for $14. So for getting the level of that post, again, you could use a lot of complex tools, but just because it costs a lot doesn't always mean it's the best tool for that. So a rotary laser level, there's different ones, and some of them have different features. Some of them have the option to have a stationary laser that'll help you set your corners. You know it's 100% exactly a 90-degree angle, so you can set that at your corners, shoot your lines, and you still have to make sure that your distances are right. You still want to check to make sure that the Pythagorean theorem has worked out. So if you set your 2 corners adjacent to that, you still want to measure that diagonal. If there's plenty of, if you're good at math, that's great. If you're not, Google Pythagorean calculator, and it'll give you the 2 measurements you have, show you the measurement you need. That is, again, on here as well, but it may not be on there for every situation. I can see there may be a need for a little tiny one here that isn't on this drawing, but you can still use a squared and b squared to find that diagonal. Another benefit of this, of a rotary laser level, is really for grading. You know, when you talk about getting your pad level or getting your crusher level, or making sure it has a slope and a certain amount of slope, you're basically going to set this up. You figure out where you want this at, set that as your 0, and then it'll beep when it gets to the right spot, or it'll stop beeping when it gets to the right spot. So depending on the tool you get, as to whether they'll have that ability to do your 90-degree angle or not, but typically it just spins around. It's looking for this, and it's looking for more of the height. Another benefit of this is for the top of your post. So you think about these trusses, they're sitting on top of those posts. And so if your ground isn't perfectly even, what you don't want to do is hope that your holes are all the same depth. The ground was perfectly even, just cut them all wherever and they'll all be level. So really what you want to do is figure out a certain distance, find your highest point, find your highest post where it goes down the ground, and set that to 0, and make a mark on all of your posts, and use that as your 0. Measure up to how tall you want your walls. Subtracting the dirt or whatever. So it'll give you your skirt board line where you put that board at, and also you can measure up from there to plan out all the other girts. So if you have a consistent base level, you cut off the top, whatever it needs to be to make sure all of those trusses are going to land on a post that's at the same level. You can make a pattern, plan all of your markings, or from here to here is going to be 24 inches on center, all the way up. Usually the top, you're going to leave that last board off if you're doing soffit, just to make sure you know where to fasten that once everything's in place for your fascia board and going to your soffit and going to your wall. So really some good things with that. Okay, so these posts, anchors have already been set. So if you look at this, we're talking about our door posts, and we're talking about our corner posts. So these are wet set brackets. So in this case, just imagine these are your poured pads. You put your sono tubes in, you poured up to the level of that sono tube. Made sure those are all level. You made sure to put those wet set brackets in before they dried because it's harder to after they dry. So we've leveled our post. So use the post leveler. We've leveled it. Normally you would take a short screw and just tack it in place, but in this case they've already got that all done. So drill your 1/2-inch hole, impact driver, and pull those. If this was an outside corner and we weren't using a wet set, or even if all the rest were wet set, we might think about a half bracket to avoid these bolts getting away, where we wouldn't have to put these wood blocks there. If you do decide you want to use a wet set at the corner, some people actually grind off the outside of that wet set bracket just so it doesn't interfere, and just use a lag bolt, just tack it in place from one side, or use a carriage bolt to flush with the outside of the wall so that you don't have any metal that's extending out and interfering with any of your wall roots. So that would be the case for all 4 of these. In this case, we use these concrete pads for our a lot of our home shows and things like that. So we weren't going to pour new pads for this, but just keep that in mind. In a better scenario, to avoid a blocking like this, would be either to cut that off and use a carriage bolt. That carriage can sit flush with the outside of the wall, and that basically turns the wet set into a half bracket wet set. So this will be for our door, the same thing. If these weren't already poured, what we would recommend is either you would cut off, if it's a wet set, you cut that off to allow that to turn into a half bracket wet set, so you don't have any interference with your wall girts or your door, or just use a half bracket. So instead of using a wet set like on everywhere else for your corners and your doors, just use a half bracket, and that does the same thing as far as not interfering. So this is the outside of the gable building. So again, the same thing. Almost all of these are situations that would be prime for half brackets, or for taking a wet set and cutting it off and make it into a half bracket.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You may have mentioned it, and I just didn't hear. What's the purpose of the wood on the side of it, down at the bottom of it?
So if we used a half bracket, we would be able to fasten directly into this. But because we're using these concrete tubes and we didn't want to start cutting off all of the pads, we still need something to fasten those wall girts into. So they just added a pad like that. You can do that. A half bracket scenario, or taking grind off tool and cutting that and make it into half bracket would be preferred, depending on what type of brackets you're doing. If this is in ground, you don't have to worry about any of that. It's all in ground. You don't have anything in your way. Excellent question. This is the posts for our lean-to. So you'll notice that those are set lower. The depth of that will be determined by where you're gonna, how high your walls are gonna be. The important thing to think about with any lean-tos is it's gonna be on the east side, or if it's going to be on the gable side. Either way, you need clearance for your wall, and you need clearance for the slope of that roof. It's not a flat roof. Again, usually these are 1/12 slope, so they don't rise as quickly as a steeper pitch. You just have to keep that in mind anytime you're thinking through that. And the estimating team will be planning this out too. So if you just buy all your stuff and hope it works, some people do that. But if you're wanting to plan out where is your lean-to going to fall, you're going to have clearance for your overhang. Is your wall going to be the 10-foot height you really think it's going to be? just send in some measurements and they'll work the drawings up. And if it doesn't work, they'll tell you, do you want to raise the wall? Do you want to lower the lean-to wall? They'll give some recommendations on that. So got all of our posts up. So as we think about it, we have 4 outside corners for our gable roof. We have 2 gable end posts for our door.